Alright, today we are tackling all the reasons why you need a carburetor for your LS application. Welcome to the nightclub, guys. It's your host, Night Wrencher. Now, last week I posted up a video that gave you guys 5 reasons why you shouldn't put a carburetor on your LS swap vehicle, but today I'm going to be jumping on the other side of the fence and I'm going to be telling you 5 reasons why you definitely should actually put a carburetor on your LS. So if you guys have been following me, this is a Holley 650 double pumper. This is, I think, the 3rd carburetor that I tried to fix up for the system. So far, this is the one that the engine likes the most. As of right now, I might decide to go bigger, but I'm going to prep 2 carburetors in preparation for a dyno session. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the 5 reasons I think that you need to install a carburetor on your LS. But before we get started on that, I just want to shout out real quick. I do have an Instagram page open. There's not a lot on it, but whenever I'm not posting here, I'm posting on the Instagram. A lot of little updates, and if you guys want to ask me any questions, you guys can go ahead and jump over to my Instagram directly. So if you want to be a part of it there, go ahead and add me there. And then now for real, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about would probably have to be the simplicity of the setup of a carburetor versus fuel injection. Fuel injection is pretty much known for having excessive amounts of wires. You have your MAP sensor, your MAP sensor, your IAT, usually your TPS. You just have so many sensors and computers just attached to any kind of modern engine that it seems like a little bit of a breath of fresh air when you have a carburetor, and the only thing you need to worry about are if your MSD box is hooked up and if your fuel pump is working. That way you can just pump the throttle to see if fuel is going into your carburetor, and that's pretty much all there is to know. You don't really have all of that complication hooking up your scan tool, looking for codes, and then maybe getting maybe a sensor that's not reading right, or you put in a sensor that belongs on a different year engine that has a different resistance, and you know, it's all these little things that actually probably make having a carburetor more appealing versus having fuel injection when you're doing your LS swap. The next thing I want to talk about is probably having more available power, and this kind of goes twofold because everybody knows that at lower RPMs, everyone pretty much understands that fuel injection beats out carburetor every single time. Fuel injection can not only produce more power, but they can do it with less fuel and thus be more fuel efficient. But what a carburetor does is, if you need more power and if you need more fuel, you can just as easily increase the jet size, and if you need more air, you can just increase the carburetor size. And you're not really limited by buying a set of injectors and then finding out they were too small, so you get a bigger set of injectors, and finding out they were too small, and then getting another set. You know, it's a lot easier to just pop open your carburetor, do some adjustments, and bada boom, bada bing. Your air-fuel ratio is now set, and you're good to go. And stock for stock, a carburetor setup will probably beat out any kind of truck manifold, provided that there is no other tuning involved except for just dialing in the carburetor versus a stock computer that you're probably going to have to pay somebody to put on a dyno and have it tuned that way. One other thing that I want to touch on is having lower fuel pressure overall. So I believe I spoke in my last video that the Holley carburetor doesn't like anything more than like 6.5 psi max. And so what that does is your fuel pump not only works less because it has less pressure to build up, but it also, because your whole system runs on a lower amount of pressure, there's less pressure overall in the lines, and if there happens to be a leak, there's less likely to be any kind of fire. So basically what happens with like I've seen this a lot with like high horsepower Walbro 255 60 psi builds, that once you spring a tiny little leak in one of your AN fittings or a hose clamp, instead of dribbling it out like it would with a low pressure system, with a high pressure system, it's going to squirt out and it's going to land on your manifold or your turbo or whatever, and it's going to ignite, and you seem to have a lot more fires in fuel injected modified applications than you would carburetor applications. The only thing you have to worry about on a carburetor is if your fuel lines, make sure they're not dragging on anything, and make sure they're not getting chafed. And then also make sure that your carburetor is properly tuned so it doesn't backfire through the intake. But aside from those two things, you don't really have a lot to worry about in terms of fire. And that's, to me, one of the nice things about having a calibrated electric fuel pump with your carburetor, is that you don't, as long as the fuel pump is on and you have fuel, and your system's not being deadheaded, causing the pressure to spike, you're not going to have any kind of leaks, regardless of how weak your lines become, because 6 psi isn't going to rupture anything, which is always really good. The fourth thing I want to talk about would probably be tuning. I did touch on this a little bit with my second point, but I'm reiterating that tuning, although you are required to have a wideband when tuning a carburetor, if you don't want to go to a dyno, you can honestly do it by yourself. You can get yourself a little tuning kit from Holley. I don't know what you do with Federbrock, but with Holley, you rip off the bowls, you change the secondary plate, or you install a secondary metering block and install some jets, or things like that, and you can just as easily tune it yourself. If you're driving and you see that you're going lean, you don't have to make an appointment with the person tuning your car. You just drive back to your driveway, step up your jets 2 sizes, 3 sizes, whatever you need, and then get back on the road and do it again. If you notice that you're in the secondaries and you're going too rich, you turn down the jets. Or if you notice that while you're just regularly driving, you're going into the power circuit too often, then you get a different power valve. And it took me a while to get all of this a little dialed in for my own setup, because since this is my first carbureted application, I didn't know where to start. So I did a lot of research, but there wasn't actually a lot of research out there. Later on, I'm going to actually make a video about tuning a Holley carburetor from scratch and showing you guys the basics of dialing everything in the way it's supposed to be. And the last thing I want to talk about is kind of a mixture of everything, and it's troubleshooting. If you ever have an issue, you're going to know exactly where your problem is. Whereas fuel injection, you might not notice that your fuel injection system is running 10% richer. You're not noticing that one injector is firing a little bit less consistent than the rest. You're not noticing that your IAT is stuck at 130 degrees and your whole system has been running rich, and then you've been tuning with your system a little bit off. And so, whereas you just need to find out if your MSD box is hooked up, you've got spark, that's the end of that. If your fuel pump is working and fuel is dribbling out of your fuel line, that's all done. If you got fuel going into your carburetor and you go to pump it and there's no fuel pumping into your carburetor when you pump it, there goes that. So troubleshooting is actually a lot easier, and it's easier now, honestly. It's easier now than it was, let's say, 30 years ago, because the electronics now are so simple. Quite literally, your MSD comes with the harness, everything's all pre-wired, and then you just power on your MSD and everything is literally just good to go. You don't have anything else to worry about. Whereas on the old system, for example, my Mustang 2, it had the Fortronic ignition system, and you had like 4 boxes, and then if it wasn't that, it was your resistor box, and it wasn't that, maybe it was your ignition module or the spacing on your distributor, and you know, it was all these things that really made carbureted systems just like less, like it left a lot of bad taste in people's mouth. But now technology is so advanced that I'm willing to bet money that if you have the same issue happening with a carbureted setup as a fuel injection setup, you're going to be able to figure out the carbureted setup at least twice as fast as you will a carbureted setup. And all of these things combined really is what pushed me to putting in a carburetor on my application, and I really have no regrets, although it was a little bit more expensive price tag. What I've learned and what I've been able to achieve so far has been priceless, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to mess with carburetors in a time when everything is dominated by fuel injection or even the newer TBI units. So that's going to wrap up today's video. I will go ahead and see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.